When my daughter-in-law told me to leave the house, I did not cry. I wanted to. My throat was heavy, and my chest felt like someone placed a stone on it, but I smiled instead. I smiled because I did not want my son to feel torn between me and his wife. I smiled because I did not want my grandchildren to see their grandmother weak. And I smiled because, in that moment, I realized something that took me a lifetime to learn. Sometimes, love means walking away quietly. My name is Fatima. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who tried all her life to hold her family together with gentle hands. But life is strange. It tests you when you least expect it. And sometimes, the people you love the most hurt you without even knowing how deeply the cuts go. The story I am about to tell is not loud. There is no shouting, no broken glass, no dramatic scenes, just silence, and the slow breaking of things that were once strong. It begins on a cold morning. I remember the air outside was chilly, and a soft fog covered the garden. I was standing near the kitchen counter, trying to make tea. My fingers were trembling, and my words came out wrong. I knew something was happening to me, but I did not understand what. I tried to call out to my son who had just left for work, but my voice refused to come out properly. The room began to spin. My legs felt weak, and in one slow moment, I fell to the floor. I remember the tiles being cold against my cheek. I remember trying to move my hand and failing, and then everything went dark. When I woke up later, I found myself in a hospital bed. There was a strange taste in my mouth, and my body felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. A nurse leaned over me and asked softly, "Can you hear me?" I nodded. My voice still refused to speak. She told me I had a stroke. For a long moment, I stared at the ceiling, not out of shock, not out of fear, but because my mind went straight to my family, to my grandchildren who waited every evening for me to sit with them and tell stories, to my son who always promised to take care of me, and to my daughter-in-law, Aisha, who used to hold my hand in the kitchen while we cooked together. I wondered how they would react. I wondered if they would be scared, or worried, or sad. But when I finally saw them, I realized life had changed in ways I never imagined. My son stood near my bed, silent, staring at me like he was trying to understand what the future would look like. Aisha sat in the corner, her arms crossed, her face tight and unreadable. My grandchildren peered in through the door, confused. I tried to smile at them. I always believed a grandmother's smile could solve anything, but my smile came out crooked, weak, almost frightening. That night, after the doctors talked, after the nurse left, after the lights dimmed, my son leaned close to me and whispered, "Ami, everything will be okay. Do not worry." I believed him. Days passed. Slowly, painfully, I started to speak again. My words were broken, sometimes mixed, sometimes lost. The right side of my body was weak, but I fought. I wanted to go home. I wanted to sit in my garden again and smell the jasmine flowers in the evening. A week later, they discharged me from the hospital, and that is when the real story began. When we returned home, things did not feel the same. I could sense the quiet tension in my daughter-in-law's eyes. She tried to be polite, but she was not her usual self. She would sigh when she had to help me stand. She would speak to me kindly, but without warmth. And at night, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her crying softly. One evening, while I was sitting in the living room watching my grandchildren play, I heard a conversation in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the house was quiet and the walls were thin. Aisha said, "I cannot do this. I am tired. I did not sign up to become a nurse. I have work, I have children, I have responsibilities. I cannot take care of her every day. My son whispered something I could not hear. She replied, with a trembling voice, "Your brothers do not help. Your sister does not even visit." Everything falls on us. I am exhausted. My heart trembled, not because of her words, but because she was right. I did not blame her. Life had changed for her too. I was no longer the strong mother-in-law who cooked, cleaned, and cared for everyone. I had become a burden, a quiet burden. A few days later, my son told me he planned a small vacation to the Maldives. Aisha needed rest, he said. She needed a break. He smiled and said, "Only 3 days, Ami, just for her mind." I smiled back and said, "Of course, she needs it." Inside my chest, something felt cold. The day they left for the airport, I waved from the doorway. I held my cane tightly and tried to look cheerful. My grandchildren hugged me, and Aisha gave me a small, polite smile. My son kissed my forehead and whispered, "Take your medicine. I will call every night." And then they left. The house felt huge and empty. Every sound echoed. Every room felt lonely. On the second day, I felt dizzy again. My vision blurred. My hand refused to move. It took me almost 10 minutes to reach the phone and call an ambulance. When they carried me back into the hospital, the nurse asked gently, "Do you have family to inform?" I nodded, but my voice failed again. The doctor told me I had suffered a second minor stroke. My body had become weaker, and I needed a longer recovery. He asked if someone from my family would come. I told him no. I said they were out of the country. He looked at me with a softness that hurt more than any illness. That night, lying alone in a silent hospital room, I thought about my life, about all the years I spent giving, loving, forgiving, and trying to be a strong mother and a gentle mother-in-law. And I realized something. Nobody stays with you forever, not even the ones you raised. I was not angry. I was not bitter. Just quiet. A nurse came in around midnight to set my blanket. She smiled kindly and said, "You remind me of my grandmother." Her words melted something inside me. That night, while rain tapped softly against the window, I reached for the small notebook in my bedside drawer. I stared at the blank page for a long time. My hand shook as I wrote, slowly, painfully, "This is my will." I never imagined writing it alone, but life teaches you in strange ways. I wrote names. I wrote decisions. I wrote the things inside my heart that I never said out loud. Not with anger, not with revenge, just with clarity. I realized something powerful. This world teaches you how people truly feel about you, not through words, but through actions. And when they flew to the Maldives while I lay in the hospital unable to walk, I understood my worth in their lives. That realization was not made of anger. It was made of silence. I did not cry. I did not complain. I simply decided that if I was going to leave this world one day, I would leave with dignity and peace. And so, I began the journey of rewriting everything: my will, my heart, and my life. The morning after I began writing my will, the hospital room felt unusually quiet. A soft light entered through the window, turning everything pale and still. I listened to the distant sounds of footsteps and trolleys in the hallway. Nurses whispered. Machines beeped softly. My hands felt weak, but my mind was clear in a way it had not been for a long time. I thought about my life before all of this, before hospitals, before walking sticks, before doctors explained my body to me as if I were a child. I was once a strong woman, a busy woman. My mornings were filled with sound, Children laughing, pans clattering, tea boiling, birds singing in the garden. I woke up every day knowing exactly who needed me. My husband, Imran, used to joke that our house was a small kingdom, and I was its queen. But everything changed when he passed away. He died quietly, in his sleep, on a winter night. There was no warning, no long illness, no struggle, just silence. One moment, he was telling me about the new shop opening in the market. The next morning, he was gone, his face peaceful, as though he was only sleeping. I remember sitting beside his body, holding his hand, expecting it to warm again. For hours, I sat there, telling him every memory that came into my heart. In the days that followed, I did not cry loudly. I cried in the kitchen when no one was there. I cried in the garden when the wind was strong enough to hide my tears. I cried quietly because I did not want my children to feel helpless. My son, Hamza, was the youngest. He was always the one closest to me. Wherever I went, he went. If I sat on the floor folding clothes, he sat beside me. When I cooked, he asked 1,000 questions. I raised my children with patience. I never wanted them to fear me. I wanted them to feel safe near me. My only rule was simple. Speak kindly. Think before you hurt someone. Hearts are fragile. Maybe that is why it surprised me so much, later in life, when people forgot how easily hearts can break. When Hamza got married to Aisha, I was happy, truly happy. She was polite, soft-spoken, and always smiling. She came into our family with so much warmth. She helped in the kitchen. She laughed with me. She asked for recipes and learned how to make biryani exactly the way I did, heavy with spices and love. For a long time, we were a perfect home. After my husband's death, Hamza told me, "Amy, you will not live alone. You will stay with us." I wanted to argue, but his voice sounded so much like his father's, firm, gentle, filled with care, that I simply nodded. At that time, I still felt young. My back was straight. My hands were strong. I woke up before everyone else, made breakfast, packed lunch boxes, and walked the children to school. In the evenings, I sat in the garden with my grandchildren and told them stories my own grandmother told me long ago, stories about bravery, kindness, and the strange ways of life. Aisha would often sit with us, resting her head on my shoulder, saying, "Ami, you feel like home." Those words stayed with me for years, but life is not a straight road. It curves quietly. Sometimes it changes direction so slowly that you do not realize it until you are standing somewhere you never meant to be. As Hamza and Aisha became busier, the house grew quieter. The joyful noise faded. Everyone started living inside their own worlds. Phones, work, meetings, school schedules. I did not complain. I understood. Time changes people. But slowly, tiny changes began to show. Aisha stopped sitting with me in the garden. She cooked alone, telling me to rest. At first, it felt kind. Later, it felt like distance. Sometimes I would walk into the living room, and she would stop talking to whoever she was on the phone with. She would smile, but it wasn't the same smile. Hamza was still kind, but tired. He came home late. He slept early. He barely noticed the small cracks forming in the family. I spent most of my days alone, sitting on the same sofa, watching sunlight move across the wall, listening to the clock tick. Time is loud when you have nothing to do. One day, I was trying to cut vegetables when my hand slipped. I thought it was just weakness. I did not know it was a warning. The first stroke came 2 weeks later. Now, lying in the hospital again, I thought back to all of that. Every small sign, every tiny moment that led to this one. A nurse walked into my room holding a breakfast tray. She placed it gently beside me and helped me sit up. "You should call your family," she said softly. "You will recover faster if you feel supported." I smiled politely. I did not have the heart to tell her they were on a beach thousands of miles away. After she left, I looked at the food, tea, bread, and a small bowl of porridge. My hands shook when I tried to lift the cup. Half the tea spilled on the blanket. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. I had spent my whole life feeding others, and now I needed help to feed myself. That is when something changed in my heart. Not anger, not self-pity, just a quiet understanding. If I did not take care of myself, nobody else would. Later that afternoon, a social worker visited my room. She walked in with a notebook, sat in the chair beside me, and smiled kindly. "I hear you had a fall at home," she said. "Do you have someone who can care for you when you leave?" I nodded. "My son," I said. "My daughter-in-law. My grandchildren." She wrote something down. "Will they be picking you up when you are discharged?" I hesitated. "They are out of the country, just for a few days." Her pen stopped. She looked up, not with judgment, but with soft understanding. "I see." It is strange how 3 words, "I see," can make you feel exposed. When she left, I opened my notebook again. The page stared at me, filled with shaky handwriting. My will was unfinished. I wrote slowly, "I am not angry with anyone. This is just my truth. My heart is tired. I only want peace." As the sun moved lower in the sky, I thought about the people in my family, the ones who still cared but were far away. My eldest daughter, Amina, lived in another city. We didn't speak often, but she always checked on me during Ramadan and Eid. My second son lived abroad. He called sometimes, sent gifts, asked if I needed money. None of them knew I was back in the hospital. Not because they did not care, but because I never wanted to trouble anyone. For most of my life, I believed that a mother should not be a burden to her children. I believed that strength meant silence. Now, lying alone in a white room with cold sheets, I was not so sure. That night, I dreamed of my husband. He was sitting in our old garden, trimming the rose bushes. The sky behind him was blue and bright. He looked up at me and smiled. He held out his hand and said, "Come sit. You look tired." I woke up with tears on my face. The next morning, the doctor came to check on me. He explained that my recovery would be slow, weeks, maybe months. He asked if I had support at home. I told him yes. I lied. A part of me hoped that when Hamza and Aisha returned, they would walk into the hospital with guilt on their faces, that they would hold my hand and say, "We are sorry we left. We are here now." But deep down, another part of me knew life was not a movie. People do not always come back with apologies. The doctor left, and the nurse returned to help me bathe. As she gently washed my hands, she said, "You remind me of my grandmother. She raised me. She was strong, even when her body was weak." I felt something warm in my chest. Not happiness, exactly, but comfort. There are people in this world who can love you without knowing your name. That afternoon, I sat up in my bed and stared out the window. Outside, a gardener watered the hospital plants. Children walked past with balloons. A father carried his daughter in his arms. Life was moving. People were laughing. The world was busy. And I was only watching. I wondered how many elderly people spent their days like this, in rooms filled with noise, but hearts filled with silence. I made a promise to myself. If I survived this, if my body healed, If I stood on my feet again, I would not spend my remaining years as a quiet shadow in my own home. I would choose peace, even if it meant choosing it alone. Hours passed. Evening came. The sky turned pink, then orange, then dark. I looked at the empty chair beside my bed. No family, no visitors, no phone calls, only silence. And yet, I was calmer than I expected. Maybe because I had finally opened my eyes to the truth. Love is not proved by blood. It is proved by presence. That night, I ended my will with the words, "I forgive everyone, but I will not leave my heart in the hands of those who forget me." I closed the notebook and placed it under my pillow, and as I closed my eyes, I felt something new inside me. Strength, quiet, gentle, tired strength, the kind that comes only after your heart has broken and healed at least once. The days turned into weeks. The hospital became a strange second home. Nurses began to recognize me. They smiled when I entered the room. They whispered encouragement when my hands shook too much to lift a cup. I was getting stronger, slowly, but the silence of my family's absence weighed heavier with each passing day. When my son and daughter-in-law returned from the Maldives, I expected a mixture of relief and joy. I had imagined it countless times in my mind. Hamza rushing in, apologizing for leaving me alone. Aisha holding my hand and saying, "I am here now. Everything will be fine." But reality, as it always does, was different. They arrived with suitcases and tired smiles. The house smelled faintly of ocean salt and sunscreen. My grandchildren ran to greet them, laughing, oblivious to the tension in the air. I tried to smile. I tried to pretend everything was normal. But when I reached out to Aisha, she stepped back. I'll unpack later," she said quickly, almost nervously. Her eyes avoided mine. Hamza stood by the door, looking unsure. He said, "Ami, we'll help you settle back in." His words sounded hollow. I wanted to believe them. But a small, quiet voice inside me whispered, "They are not the same. They have already moved on." I spent the first evening trying to follow my old routines. I attempted to walk to the kitchen, make tea, and organize the living room. But my body refused. Aisha hovered near me, her face tight, correcting my every move. "Let me do that, Ami," she said. "I don't want you to overexert yourself." Her tone was not unkind, but it was not warm. It felt like instructions, not care. And in that moment, I realized I had become a guest in my own home. Hamza tried to bridge the gap. He would smile at me during meals. He would bring me my medicine. He would sit near me while watching television. But even he seemed distracted. The vacation, the work, the phone calls, they had changed him. Small tensions began to appear, almost unnoticed. One afternoon, I asked Aisha if she could help me with my clothes. She hesitated, looking at the clock. "I'm busy, Ami. Can we do it later?" she said. Later never came. I began to feel invisible. The first argument, or what felt like one, happened quietly, like a whisper that became a storm. I tried to sit on the sofa with my grandchildren. They were building blocks. Hamza was on the phone. Aisha was preparing dinner. I reached for a toy to join in. One of the blocks slipped and fell. I tried to pick it up. Aisha snapped, not harshly, but sharply enough to hurt. "Ami, please sit still. You might fall again." I froze. I did not say anything. I only looked at her, my heart sinking. I understood her concern, but the words cut deeper than any anger could. I left the room quietly. That night, I sat in my old bedroom, staring at the wall. I thought about all the years I had spent raising my children, cooking, cleaning, caring. And now I was careful not to disturb anyone. I was cautious with every word, every move. I wondered if this is what it felt like to become invisible. Over the next few days, small tensions multiplied. I noticed how Aisha would lock the bathroom door when I entered. She would clear the kitchen counter before I could sit there. She would speak to Hamza in hushed tones, glancing at me occasionally, as though I were a problem they were trying to solve quietly. Hamza noticed my hesitation, my silence, my quiet withdrawal, but instead of confronting Aisha, he often avoided the situation altogether. He would smile weakly, stroke my hair, and say, "Don't worry, Ami, it's fine." I nodded. It wasn't fine. One evening, I tried to speak to Hamza alone. We were in the garden. The sun was low, painting the sky orange and pink. I said softly, "Hamza, I feel unwelcome sometimes." He looked at me, startled. I don't know what you mean, Ami," he said. "I just want us all to be comfortable." I shook my head. "I know you mean well. But your wife, she seems tired of me being here. I cannot do what I used to do. And I feel like a stranger." Hamza's lips pressed together. He seemed torn. "I didn't realize," he whispered. "But Aisha is she's exhausted. She needs space." I sighed softly. "I understand," I said. "But I am your mother. I raised you. And now, I feel lost in my own home." He did not know what to say. So we sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the street, the occasional honk of a car, the rustling of leaves in the wind. Later that night, I wrote again in my notebook, "They do not see my heart, but I cannot force it into view. I must find peace on my own." The next morning, things worsened. Aisha was upset because the children had spilled juice on the carpet. She raised her voice, not at them, but at me. "Ami, can you supervise them for 1 second without leaving everything to mess?" I froze. I wanted to defend myself, but my weak voice would not carry the words. Hamza appeared in the doorway. "Please, Aisha, calm down," he said. But the tension lingered. That night, I stayed awake for hours. I remembered my husband's calm voice. I remembered the times I had held my children through tears. And now, I was the one crying quietly in my heart. It was not anger that kept me awake. It was grief. Grief for the family I had built. Grief for the life I had once known. I began to notice other things too. Letters left unopened on the table, photographs tucked away in drawers, rooms locked that once felt open. I realized that my presence was tolerated, but not cherished. One afternoon, I asked Aisha for help walking to the living room. She held my elbow tightly, guiding me. I could feel her impatience. "Be careful," she said, voice clipped. "And please, Ami, do not take so long." I nodded, keeping my eyes down. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The children sensed the tension, too. They would look at me nervously. "Grandma, are you okay?" they asked. I smiled at them, but inside I felt the walls of my world closing in. I tried to find solace in small things, reading my favorite book, watching the garden bloom, sipping tea quietly on the balcony, but everywhere I turned, there were reminders that I no longer belonged fully in my home. One evening, I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. Aisha was speaking to Hamza in the kitchen, her voice low but clear enough to break my heart. "I don't know how much longer I can do this. She's slowing everything down. I can't breathe with her here all the time." Hamza's voice was calm, almost pleading. "Aisha, she's my mother. We must care for her." She replied sharply, "I am trying, but I feel trapped, Hamza. I feel like I'm losing my life." I did not move. I did not respond. I only listened. And for the first time, I truly understood. I had become a weight in their lives. That night, I sat in my room and cried quietly, tears slipping down my cheeks. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft. Steady tears that carried years of love, devotion, and exhaustion. I realized that no one could fix this. Not Hamza, not Aisha, not even my grandchildren, who were too young to understand the storm quietly gathering around us. I took my notebook and wrote again. I cannot make them love me. I cannot force them to see me. I can only choose how I respond. The days passed, and tensions grew. Meals became quiet affairs. Conversations were limited to instructions and polite words. I tried to participate. I tried to laugh. I tried to be myself. But the home that once felt warm now felt cold. Each room echoed with unspoken words. Each glance seemed heavy with judgment or impatience. One morning, Aisha asked me to leave the kitchen while she prepared breakfast. I obeyed, though my heart sank. I felt the loss of my place in my own home, the place I had built with love and sweat for decades. I tried talking to Hamza again, but he was busy. He had meetings, calls, and responsibilities. His love was there, I knew, but stretched thin. It could not protect me from the quiet loneliness growing inside. That evening, I sat on the balcony, staring at the sky. The air was crisp. The world moved below. I thought about all the moments that had brought me here, the joy, the laughter, the love, and now, the quiet sorrow. I made a choice then, slowly, gently, with my heart heavy but clear. I would protect myself. I would not fight. I would not argue. I would quietly step back, letting them live their lives while I found my own peace. And I began to write again. This is my story now. I will live it quietly, carefully. I will heal, not for them, but for me. The turning point came quietly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a loud argument, a slammed door, or a sudden confrontation. It was small, subtle, and sharp, like a thorn under the skin that you only notice when it festers. It happened on a rainy afternoon. The sky was gray, the clouds heavy with water. Raindrops tapped gently against the windows. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Hamza was at work, and the children were in their rooms doing homework. Aisha moved silently around the kitchen, preparing tea and sandwiches. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask her how she was feeling, to offer help, to reconnect. But something held me back. The words stuck in my throat like small stones I could not swallow. And then it happened. I was looking for my notebook. I had left it on the kitchen counter the night before. When I entered, I saw her sitting at the table, papers spread out in front of her. My heart sank. Among the papers was my notebook, open, my words visible. I froze. She was reading it. My private thoughts, my fears, my forgiveness, everything I had written in confidence, everything I had not even told my son, she was reading. She looked up at me, startled. I didn't mean to snoop, she stammered, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. Curiosity, confusion, judgment. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "Those are private," I whispered. Her hands trembled as she closed the notebook. I wanted to understand," she said, but I could see the tension in her eyes. She did not understand, and she never would. I stepped back, my chest tightening. The room felt smaller. The walls pressed in. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. And in that moment, I realized no one in my family truly saw me anymore. Not the me I had been, not the me I still was. only the shadow of a woman who required care, inconvenience, and attention. I returned to my room, tears welling in my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. I tried to steady my breath, tried to calm my mind, but the pain was deep. Not just physical, but emotional. A quiet betrayal, the kind that leaves invisible scars. That night, I wrote again. They do not see me. They never have. And perhaps they never will. I gave them everything, and now I have nothing. The next day, I noticed subtle changes in Aisha's behavior. She avoided me entirely. She barely spoke during meals. She prepared food silently, leaving me alone at the table. Hamza tried to mediate, but even he seemed to grow tired of the tension. One afternoon, I overheard her speaking to a friend on the phone. She's slowing everything down. I don't want to hurt her, but I can't stay patient anymore. I sat on the balcony, listening, my heart breaking. She was right. I was slowing everything down. I had lost my strength, my voice, my role in the home, and she could no longer endure my presence. That evening, I confronted Hamza gently, sitting beside him on the sofa. "Hamza," I whispered, I think it might be better if I stay somewhere else for a while, perhaps until I am stronger." His face fell. He shook his head quickly. "No, Ami, you don't mean that," he said, his voice tight. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. Even he had begun to accept the quiet truth. I continued softly. "I feel unwelcome. I do not want tension in our home. I only want peace." He did not respond immediately. He looked at me, his lips pressed together, his hands trembling slightly. Finally, he whispered, "If you think that's best, I will support you. But you are my mother. You are my family." I nodded, trying to hold back tears. I did not want to cause him pain, but I also could not remain where I was invisible. The following week, I made arrangements to stay with a distant cousin who lived in a quiet neighborhood. It was not far from the city, but far enough that I could heal, regain my strength, and find myself again. Packing my few belongings, I noticed the small photographs on the wall, the memories that had once been my pride. I touched each frame gently, knowing I might not return for months. The day I left, the house was unusually quiet. Hamza stood by the door, his eyes wet. Aisha avoided my gaze entirely. The children clung to my hands, their little arms trembling. I hugged them tightly, whispering, "Take care of each other. Be kind. Listen to your hearts." And then I walked out. I did not look back. I did not want to see their faces clouded with guilt, confusion, or relief. I simply moved forward, step by step, leaning on my cane, feeling the weight of years and love in my bones. When I arrived at my cousin's house, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I would be free from tension, free to heal. Sadness for the family I had raised, the home I had nurtured, and the love I had given so freely, only to feel rejected. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet healing. My cousin treated me with warmth and care. I spent my days walking slowly in her garden, reading books I had forgotten existed, and writing more in my notebook. I wrote letters to my grandchildren, even though I did not know if I would send them. I wrote about my memories, my lessons, my love, and then, one afternoon, as I rested by the window, I realized something. I was finally thinking about myself, not in anger, not in sorrow, but in a gentle way. I was no longer the woman who moved through the world only to serve others. I was learning that my heart, my needs, my dignity also mattered. It was the hardest lesson of my life. A week later, Hamza called. His voice was soft, careful. Auntie, I hope you are well. We miss you. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. I wanted to answer with anger. I wanted to accuse. But instead, I said calmly, I am well, Hamza. Take care of yourself and the children. He hesitated. We will try to make things right, he whispered. I said nothing more. I hung up and returned my notebook. I wrote, I cannot make others see me. I cannot force love where it is absent, but I can choose my own peace. That evening, as the sun set, I walked slowly into the garden. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Birds chirped softly. The world moved quietly, and I felt alive. It was in that moment that I understood the turning point of my life. Not the strokes, not the absence of my family, but the quiet, undeniable truth. I was responsible for my own peace. I would no longer let my value be measured by how much I gave or how visible I was in someone else's life. I would no longer wait for recognition, love, or attention from those too tired, too blind, or too selfish to give it. I would live for myself now. It was terrifying at first. The silence pressed down. The guilt gnawed at me, but slowly, the fear transformed into quiet strength. I began to rewrite everything, not just my will, not just my thoughts, but the way I would live the rest of my life. I made plans for the future, not a future dependent on anyone else, but a future where I could find joy in my own presence. I planned small walks in the park. I scheduled visits with friends I had long neglected. I began reading books I loved but never finished. I even started learning to paint again, something I had given up decades ago. It was not a sudden happiness. It was not dramatic. It was a quiet, steady reclaiming of myself. And slowly, the weight on my heart began to lift. I realized something essential. Life does not always give you the family you hope for. Life does not always return the love you give, but life does give you a chance to love yourself, to honor yourself, to find peace. And in that understanding, I felt my first real smile in months, a smile that was mine alone, not dependent on anyone else. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days after leaving my son's house were quiet, almost painfully so at first. But that quiet became a companion, gentle and understanding. It gave me space to breathe, space to think, space to feel without judgment or expectation. I began to notice small things I had forgotten: the smell of rain on wet soil, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children in the park. Life went on outside the hospital walls, outside my son's home, outside the small routines that had tied me down for so long. And I began to remember who I was before the weight of duty and expectation pressed me into corners. My body was weak, yes, but my heart began to strengthen. I spent mornings slowly walking through the garden, my cane in hand, feeling the wind brush against my face. I began reading again, books that spoke to the soul, stories of courage, love, and quiet resilience. I even started writing letters to my grandchildren, though I did not know if I would ever send them. I wrote not for acknowledgement, but for my own heart, so it would not grow quiet and small. Weeks turned into months. I learned to cook small meals for myself again, even if I trembled with the knife. I learned to sit for hours and simply be without feeling guilty. I discovered a world of small pleasures I had long ignored: the sun on my face, the warmth of tea in my hands, the laughter of neighbors who stopped by to say hello. One afternoon, my son called. His voice was soft, careful, almost hesitant. "Ami, I hope you are well. We miss you. We've realized maybe we were too busy, too distracted. We should have been there." I listened quietly, holding the phone in my trembling hands. I wanted to cry. I wanted to shout, but I only whispered, "I am well, Hamza. Take care of yourself and the children." He hesitated, then said, We want you to come back home. Can you try?" I closed my eyes. For a moment, my heart wavered, but then I remembered the weeks of tension, the small sharp words, the silent glances. I remembered my quiet suffering, the moments I felt unseen and unwanted. And I understood that if I returned too soon, I would return to a life that was no longer mine to live. I cannot come back yet," I said softly. "I need time. I need to heal. Please understand." He was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "I understand, Ami. We'll wait. Take all the time you need." I hung up and looked out the window. The garden shimmered in the afternoon sun. I felt a lightness I had not known in months. In the weeks that followed, I began to visit small cafes, meet old friends, and even talk to people I had lost touch with over the years. I laughed again, softly at first, then louder. I felt warmth in my chest I had thought I had lost forever, and slowly, the idea of family shifted in my mind. Family was not just the people who lived under the same roof. It was the people who saw you, who understood you, who loved you quietly without conditions. I began to understand my son too. Hamza loved me, yes, but life had changed him. The responsibilities, the pressure, the fear of conflict. He could not protect me from Aisha's frustration. It was not malice. It was life, quietly grinding everyone down. I forgave them, not in a dramatic way, not with words or gestures. I forgave them silently, in my heart, because forgiveness is not about them. It is about freeing yourself. Months later, I received a letter from Aisha. I opened it carefully, not knowing what to expect. Her handwriting was neat but shaky. "Ami, I have thought about everything. I see now that I was harsh and impatient. I did not understand your struggles, your love, your sacrifices. I am sorry. I hope you can forgive me. I want us to have peace." I folded the letter gently. I did not respond immediately. I let the words sink in like water filling a dry vase. That evening, I wrote in my notebook, "They are learning. I am learning. We are all learning how to love and forgive. It is not perfect, but it is enough." The next weeks brought more gentle gestures. Hamza called regularly, checking on my health. Aisha sent small gifts, little things she knew I liked, a book, a scarf, flowers. The children visited sometimes, bringing stories and laughter. I began to feel a connection again, but on my terms, not with fear or obligation, not as a shadow in someone else's home. One afternoon, as I walked in the park, I saw a young woman helping an elderly man cross the street. Her patience, her gentle touch, reminded me of what I had once been. I realized then that love is not always grand or dramatic. It is quiet. It is consistent. It is patient, even when misunderstood. I began to understand that my role as a mother and grandmother had changed. I could not control the hearts of others. I could not ensure that they always treated me with care, but I could control how I treated myself. And that, I realized, was more important than anything else in the world. I started small routines for myself. Morning tea in the balcony, watching the sunrise, stretching my legs in the garden, reading poetry, even if I only understood parts of it. Writing letters, even if I did not send them. It was a life rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, From the inside out, I felt peace in small victories, being able to walk without trembling, cooking a full meal by myself, reading aloud to my grandchildren over video calls. Each small success reminded me of my strength, my resilience, my worth. One evening, Hamza called again. "Ami," he said softly, "I wanted to tell you. Aisha has changed. She understands now. She wants us to spend time together again. Only if you're ready." I paused. I thought about the months of silence, the tears, the small betrayals, the quiet pain. And then I realized something important. I was ready. Not because everything was perfect, not because the past had vanished, but because I had healed, because I had learned to stand on my own heart, because I knew that love, true love, was patient, forgiving, and flexible. When they visited next, I did not enter with fear. I did not hide behind silence. I welcomed them with quiet strength. Hamza held my hand. Aisha smiled softly. A real smile this time. The children hugged me tightly, full of innocent joy. And for the first time in many months, I felt a sense of home. Not just a house, but a place in my family's heart, and more importantly, a place in my own heart. I continued my routines, my walks, my writing, my reading. But now there was connection too, a connection built slowly, carefully, with forgiveness and understanding. I realized that life does not always follow the path we imagine. It is messy. It is slow. It is filled with moments of pain, misunderstanding, and heartbreak. But it is also filled with moments of growth, healing, and quiet joy. We cannot force others to see our worth. We cannot demand love. We can only choose how we respond, how we heal, and how we continue to love. And that, I think, is the most important lesson of all. Years passed. I grew older, yes, but I also grew quieter in the best possible way. Not lonely, not bitter, just steady. Like a tree that bends with the wind but does not break. I continued to visit my cousin, spend mornings in the garden, and write in my notebooks. I met friends for tea, shared laughter with neighbors, and watched my grandchildren grow over video calls and weekend visits. Sometimes, I thought about the house I had left, the kitchen I had once ruled, the family I had nurtured. And I smiled, not with sadness, but with understanding. I realized that life does not always give you the story you imagine. People change, situations change, even love can shift in ways we do not expect. But what life gives us, always, is choice. The choice to heal, the choice to forgive, the choice to live gently, fully, quietly, with dignity. One evening, I sat on the balcony as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, the way it always had been when I was a child. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. I thought of my husband, of Hamza, of Aisha, of my grandchildren. I thought of the tears I had cried, the fears I had faced, the strength I had discovered. And I understood. Peace is not found in the approval of others. It is found in the quiet corners of your own heart. It is found when you forgive, even when forgiveness is hard. It is found when you choose to rise, even after being unseen, unheard, or forgotten. I looked at my hands, now slightly wrinkled, the veins raised from years of love, work, and care. These hands had fed children, held a husband, nurtured a home, and written letters no one would ever read. And yet, these same hands had learned to care for me, to protect me, to remind me that I was still whole, still worthy, still alive. That night, as I closed my notebook, I whispered a quiet prayer. Thank you for the lessons, the tears, the love, the strength. May I continue to live with peace, with patience, and with a heart that remembers its own worth. And I slept, deeply, fully, with no fear, no expectations, just warmth, just quiet joy, just the knowledge that life, in all its twists and turns, had given me exactly what I needed. Myself. Life will always be imperfect. People will come and go. Hearts will misunderstand. But if you nurture your own, you will always have a home, no matter where you are. And that, perhaps, is the most precious gift of all.